I don't know how I'm gonna get off this island. I've been stranded here for days. What is this? Oh my goodness. It's a treasure map. This will lead me off the island. And even better, it's a sewing themed treasure map. I think we should figure out how to make this because we all need to learn how to use all of our sewing treasure. So trace all of your designs. Now I am tracing onto Steam-A-Seam Light. You could also use Heat and Bond Light. You just want to make sure you don't use the Ultra because you can't sew through that and you're going to want to be able to sew. Steam-A-Seam is my favorite though. So trace all of your designs onto the Steam-A-Seam, and then once you're done tracing, you can roughly cut around. You don't need to be super precise. Roughly cut around and then peel off the one side of the paper backing. Then you're going to press it onto your fabric with your hot iron. Then you'll be ready to fuse it onto your project when you're all done, but we're not going to do that part just yet. So right now, just do all of your tracing, trim around the edges, decide what fabric you want to put your images on, and then go ahead and iron them onto the fabric. Once you're done with that, we're going to just cut everything out. Here is where you want to be more precise, and you want to cut everything out along the lines. Now, I'm using a scissors that I tend to not use just for fabric, but they're sharp enough that they're going to cut nicely through my fabric because you are also cutting through this paper layer here. So go ahead and cut. I'm just kind of cutting them apart first, and then I'll get in there with the details, and I'm going to trim around with my scissors and trim right around those edges of everything until it's nice and neat. All right, once you're done with all of your precision trimming, then you can go ahead and peel off that paper backing. So you've got paper on the front and the back. So we're just peeling off the back side for right now, and that leaves a kind of temporary adhesive on your fabric. It becomes permanent once you press it with your iron, and then for extra durability, we're gonna stitch everything into place when we're all done. Next up, we have our names. Now, I put this through the printer and printed onto the fabric. I just put some Heat and Bond on the back side. Now I'm just trimming it off. So the back side of the fabric will be sticky, so I can iron them in place. And again, I used Heat and Bond Light for this one. I'm cutting with a pinking shears just to give a little bit of a detailed edge. It also helps eliminate some fraying. Now for this, if you didn't want to have to stitch these into place, you could use Heat and Bond Ultra, and then when you do iron them down, they are a permanent adhesion, but you cannot stitch through it. Okay, next we're gonna lay everything out. Now this part, take your time. You can lay out your treasure map whatever way you want. Once you're happy with the layout, then you can start layering and pressing your applique pieces into place with your iron. So you can see I started with this little pond area for our stitchy swamp. Was it stitchy swamp? Spool swamp? I don't remember. Anyway, you get the picture, right? So go ahead and layer the pieces on, ironing as you go. Once you're happy with your placement, move on to the next part of the map. I kind of laid everything out before I ironed anything down just to make sure I was really happy that it flowed nicely and looked the way I wanted it to. And then I just start pressing them down and adding things wherever I want them to be. So once you get all of that done and you get everything pressed with your iron, because that's going to make that adhesion more permanent but able to stitch through if you use the Steam-A-Seam Light. So again, just keep that pressing going and get everything just how you want it. Next, we're gonna peel that paper backing off of our landmark labels and we're gonna put those in place as well. Same thing here, you wanna put them in place and then press them with the iron to tack them down before you do any of your stitching. Now, once I know I'm done with all my ironing, I'm gonna take my heat erase pen and I'm gonna draw my little treasure map detail and outline. This is where I wanna do my main stitching. All right, now we're ready to put this all together. So we've got our cutie frame and we've got our machine on here. We're in free motion mode and we are just working along the edge. Now, my intention was for this to be a nice scrappy stitch. So I am not worrying too much about perfection here. I am just going over from piece to piece and I'm just stitching with a dark contrasting thread. I'm using black and I'm stitching around those edges because I want it to look scrappy. I don't want it to look perfect. I want my lines to not be straight. I'm going over some of the areas several times here. Nice thing with the cutie frame, it's really easy to adjust as you go, and you can do a small section and then you just take off your clamps, you move your quilt, and then you go to the next section. I found this really fun and actually super relaxing, and I loved that I could quilt this with my home sewing machine, that it's lightweight, it's portable, I can take it anywhere with me, and I still get that fun long-armed look, and this gave me the freedom to do so much with the free motion quilting. This is the most free motion I've ever done, and I loved every step of the way. So again, we're going back to the project here, and we are just stitching. I'm completely stitching randomly. Wherever I see something and I think, okay, yeah, I want to stitch around the blocks, I want to stitch around all of my labels. And using this frame really allows me to just be able to stitch wherever I want. I'm just guiding my machine and basically doing the free motion work as I'm going. Like I had no plan going into this. I'm just doing whatever I feel like doing in the moment, which to me is so freeing and so much fun.
Applique is a technique where fabric shapes are sewn onto a larger fabric background to create decorative designs. There are several methods, but 3 common types include raw edge applique, where shapes are cut out and stitched directly onto the fabric, great for casual or modern looks. Needle turn applique involves hand turning the edges under for a smooth finished appearance. Decorative stitch applique uses your sewing machine's built-in stitches, like satin or blanket stitch, to secure and embellish the edges, adding both function and flair. Can you tell what kind of applique method Missy is using?
Now I am using a heat erase pen here wherever I want to draw. If it helps to have a line to follow, you can use a heat erase pen, an air erase pen, whatever kind you have for marking fabric. But I'm just marking my little lines here so that I can see where I want to go, and that helps me to keep everything how I want it to look at the end. As I'm working around these spools, again, we're not striving for perfection. If I go off the edges a little bit, that's intentional. So just remember to relax, put your shoulders back, have some fun while you're doing this. Don't be tense. It's easier to do if you just relax and just kind of let the machine guide you. You're guiding the machine, but you know what I mean? Like just kind of just do whatever you feel like doing. And don't worry about perfection, because I think this scrappy, sloppy outline stitch is just so much fun when it's all done and everything comes together. So I found that once I got to the end of my quilt, it was easier for me to take it off the frame, flip it around, and put the bottom of the map up towards the top of my frame. It was just easier for me to be able to get everything stitched the way that I wanted. So again, I'm just clamping the quilt down, rolling up that excess just to make sure that nothing gets stitched where it shouldn't. And then I'm gonna start at the little compass there, and I'm gonna stitch around all the letters and everything. I'm just gonna keep going with my free motion process until everything is perfectly scrappy and stitchy the way I like it. I just love the way the Mini Quilter gives me the freedom to do this anywhere I am. Like I could do this at any of my sewing machines. And this is great for quilts and smaller projects, because if I don't want to load something on the big long arm, I have this option that I can take anywhere with me. I love that I can take it with on a quilting retreat, because I'm going on a couple this fall, and this is going to be coming with me because it's just so much fun. All right, we are actually all done with the stitching. So now I'm taking this over to my cutting mat, and I'm gonna lay it all out nice and smooth. I did give it a quick press with the iron, which got rid of any of those heat erase marks that I made. Now I'm just gonna square it up. So I'm gonna square up all of the edges, trim off that excess on all four sides. The backing, again, is already on there. And then all we have left to do is add the binding. And I'm gonna make the binding be that brown color because I want it to mimic the burnt edges of a map without actually having to burn anything. So you guys, that's really all there is to it. This project is meant to inspire you to have some fun, and to just give yourself permission to play and not worry about perfection. Do whatever you want, because I want you to know there are no rules in sewing and quilting, and especially free motion quilting. Just get out there and try it and have so much fun. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed our fun sewing treasure map. I'd love to see photos of the ones you make hanging in your sewing room. So please send me pictures, tag me on Instagram. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to follow along on YouTube at The Little Green Bean for more full-length tutorials.
In the heart of a quiet antique mall, a rare species of quilter begins her search. This is Kristin Rauch, a Grace Ambassador with a keen eye for the unique and unexpected. Today, she's on the hunt not for fabric or thread, but for something far more elusive, the perfect vintage treasure to crown her whimsical mushroom block. With patience, instinct, and a touch of creative flair, Kristin navigates aisles of forgotten wonders in pursuit of the cap that will bring her project to life. Now, with her treasure in hand, we follow her back to the studio, where the real magic begins. It's time for Kristin to cut, piece, and stitch the mushroom block into existence.
Okay, let's cut out the fabric for our camp mushroom. We have two sizes, a 15-inch block and a 20-inch block, so you can pick which one you'd like. For today, we're just going to make a mini. We're going to start with the 15-inch size. I have the mushroom cap all prepped for both. 15-inch block, you need 8.5-inch square, which you may notice my corners are cut out of one side, because that's what the found treasure quilt block was. I added corners to the bottom, but we are going to stitch and flip the background to the top corner. So I just left them because I have enough room to do the stitch and flip and not have to worry about filling it in. And then for the 20-inch block, which we'll cut out after the 15-inch block, I have the cap cut at 12.5-inch square. And you're just going to follow the instructions for cutting underneath the block size that you want to cut. I prefer to cut my widest or tallest pieces first. So I'm actually going to start from the bottom for my piece G's, and then I'm going to move my piece to my piece F's on the side. And then I will cut the piece E's, C's, and D's. And I like to cut those directional, which is why I put the W for width and the T for tall. But before I do the background, I'm just going to cut out the mushroom stem, which is piece B. And for the 15-inch size, it's 3.5 by 5.5. So I am just going to cut 3.5-inch wide. I'm going to cut off that bottom. I'm using some amazing Grace Company rulers and rotary cutters here, and I really like it because they have this cap that you can add to your rotary cutter that helps give you a guide to run along the grooves of the ruler. This just goes up against the blade. It's really easy to open up, and then you actually put this right back in, and it's like pushing this up, and it like kind of clicks it into place. And I can just pull that right back off and put this in and let it go, and it reattaches. So we have our mushroom stem now, which will go underneath of our mushroom cap. And now I'm going to grab the background fabric and we'll cut that out. I'm going to need the bigger ruler for this from Grace. And I found this amazing fabric in my stash we're going to use for the background. It's camping dinosaurs. I just thought it was fun because there's mushrooms on there too. So I'm going to start with the largest size. Like I said, I like to kind of cut the selvage off to give myself a kind of registration cut. And now I can base all my other cuts off of that. On the bottom of this ruler, I also have Grace's True Grips, so it doesn't slide around. If one side of your ruler doesn't have the grooves, you can just flip over your rotary cutter and cut it out. Because it's safer to cut going across, I'm gonna just turn it a little bit so I can get 2 1.5-inch strips. I'm going to set all my pieces to the side right now, but then I will show you what I do before I go to my sewing machine to sew them. Next, I'm going to cut my side pieces, which are 13.5 inches tall by 4 inches wide. There's one of our sides. So I'm just going to work my way down now. E is the next smallest size at 3 inches wide by 5.5 inches tall. And I know that because I just cut 13.5 that I can get that out of this. So I can just cut a longer strip and then I can cut my 5.5. Okay, next I have 2 2.5-inch squares and 2 1-inch squares. So the reason I cut largest to smallest is because in case you're cutting from a smaller piece of fabric for this pattern we do, if we didn't cut those long border pieces first, we may not be able to get them cut after we cut out some of the smaller pieces. So we have all of our pieces cut out of the 15-inch block. So something I like to do is I have these flannel backed boards. I just use foam core and use packing tape to tape flannel. And they get very dirty, but it's actually a great way to store blocks if you are able to cut stuff and not maybe get around to sewing it right away. And I have bigger ones. This is 18 by 24. So we should be able to squeeze our block onto this. It looks like it might overlap the edges just a tiny bit. So as you can see, I'm laying out my blocks in order on the board. And that helps me know where everything goes, and I can just easily kind of flip through and sew everything and then put it right back where it belongs. So that's kind of the layout of my large block. I'm going to speed run cutting out the 20-inch block, and then we'll sew these blocks up. So we have our 2 hemp mushroom blocks ready to go, and we can head over to the sewing machine and get them sewn up. It is pretty easy construction, and I will walk you through step by step. We are going to use the stitch and flip technique. Basically, you're taking a square and you are going to mark the square on the back side with a diagonal line, And this fabric is non-directional, so I don't really have to pay attention. And then I'm gonna place that square in the corner of wherever it goes. On this case, it's the top corner of the big cap part of the mushroom. I'm gonna sew along that line. I'm gonna cut off this excess up here. I'm gonna flip this up to fill that corner. So I'll just explain it at the sewing machine again, but I'm going to quickly do my lines on the back of all of my stitch and flip pieces, just so they're all ready to go. So we are all set. Just putting our squares back on our boards where they go. If you don't have boards like these, no problem. I would just maybe suggest laying out your block next to your sewing machine so it's easy to see and know where each piece goes. So I'll meet you at the sewing machine. Okay, we are set up at my machine here. I have the black on the blackboard and I have an iron right down here in case you can see it. I also have the pattern because it's helpful for me to just double check that I'm sewing in the right order. So first we're going to stitch and flip our piece C's to our piece A, and you can see I have them aligned in the corner and I have that diagonal line already drawn. So we're going to just sew a seam right on top of that line, and even just to the outside edge of that line is ideal because we want to keep this full section of this corner available to flip into place. And then we're going to do the same on this side. So let's get started over here. I'm just going to set this one there. And even though I have a little bit cut out here, you can see I have plenty of room. So I'm aligning my side edges here. On the 20-inch block, you'll be able to see how I align it perfectly in the corner. But if you have something that doesn't go quite all the way to the corner, I think that's fine to do a stitch and flip without filling that corner in first. Grab some scissors because I do have that first tail on my sewing machine. So we have our seam here. Now what we're going to do is cut 1/4 of an inch away from that. And you can do it one of two ways. I will show you both ways here and you can pick which is most comfortable for you. The first way is to actually use a ruler. And I have this tiny little ruler, but you can use any ruler. You just need something to measure 1/4 of an inch away from the seam, and then you cut that seam allowance, and we have a really nice 1/4 inch seam allowance. And on the next corner, I'll show you what I tend to do until I get to very large sizes of squares, which is to not use a rotary cutter. I'm just going to pop this down to the iron and iron that flat. So now we have our corner nicely filled in. We are going to take our next piece and align it in the opposite top corner. And we're going to do the same thing where we stitch and trim it and flip it. We have a nice seam there, maybe hard to see on the fabric. The 2.5 inch square, which this size, is getting a little bit big for me to do this. I can eyeball a 1/4 inch seam pretty well, and if it's really close, and then I just trim it with my scissors. It saves me a little bit of time, and that's how I typically do a stitch and flip type sewing technique to trim it down until I get to a larger size. Probably 3 inches is where I would probably stop doing that. So we have our cap done. The next stitch and flip corners are the bottom pieces. These are piece D on piece B. So I'm going to do the same thing and stitch and flip these real quick. And I can just do both of the stitchings at the same time. And then I can trim at the same time. Again, feel free to do whichever method of trimming you feel most comfortable with. And I'm going to flip these open and iron them real quick with my iron. So there we have our mushroom stem, piece B and the 2 piece Ds. The next step in the pattern is to sew piece E to the sides of piece B to encase the stem, so to speak. And we're just going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, aligning the sides. And it's up to you if you use a back stitch. I tend to, just because I grew up with a seamstress mother. And so I'm much more used to doing a back stitch than not. And I'm going to grab my other piece E, lay it right sides together, and align the opposite side of piece B and sew it on real quick. So there we have our stem, which is piece B, with 2 piece E's on the side. We're just going to iron it flat so those seams go out to the sides. You could also go in, but I tend to like to iron the seams how the fabric likes to lay unless the pattern calls for something different. Now we're going to sew this section to the mushroom cap, flipping right sides together. And then we're going to sew our piece F to the sides of the mushroom, and then we'll be able to add our piece G along the top and bottom last. This is a really quick block and, in my opinion, enjoyable to make because simple blocks for some reason just bring a lot of satisfaction for me. If you really love a mushroom quilt, I have a very nice pattern called Capped that all the mushrooms and the background are square patchwork. I think I cut my tall pieces the wrong size. So I'm going to go double check my measurements because it came out maybe ½ an inch bigger. So let me go just double check that real quick. Okay, I did just have them slightly off. So I'm going to be double checking all my measurements. It's always tricky sometimes when I'm in the design mode to get all those measurements perfectly correct. But I also don't think that I need to hide that from you because we all make mistakes, right? And that's fine. I am just going to do a little bit of a press real quick, and my tiny little side mat here, I use a wool mat on like a little rolling cart for when I'm at my machine. It's a little bit small, but we'll make it work. I'm also using my Aliso iron, which I love so much, but it does take a little bit of getting used to because it pops up and down. So now I'm just going to sew on these top borders, which I can also see are a little bit big, but that's okay. Like I said, I'm going to double check all my measurements for you so you won't have any problems. And we'll be all set with our 15-inch block. On the last borders, I do like to backstitch at the ends in case you're not sewing your block into a quilt or quilting it right away, because that just helps lock everything in place and hold the block long term from unraveling, because that is a big bummer when you don't quilt something right away and you have blocks unravel on you. Of course, we're going to be quilting this right away, so we shouldn't have that problem. Just a little tip from me to you. And as you can see, if this ever happens to you, I'm just trimming these before I flip them open because I have the line below of this other piece to trim it by. So I apologize if the measurements I say in this video might be slightly different than the measurements you get on your final pattern that you print out to make this, but it will be 100% accurate on the pattern. So here is our camp mushroom block with our found treasure quilt block in the middle. Isn't that adorable? I love it. I think it's so fun, and I hope you really enjoy making this. I'm gonna quick sew up the 20-inch block, which is sewn in the exact same manner, and all the pieces are actually labeled the exact same as well. They're just a little bit different size. I did just want to mention, if you want to measure after you do a stitch and flip to have this line of the piece A continue to make sure that fully fits into the corner and trim it perfectly square, you can also do that on these down here as well as those. If you're really good at stitch and flip, you might not need to do that. Or if you're good at just eyeballing kind of a straight line, I'm not. I wish I was a perfectionist, I guess. I wish everything would turn out perfect, I guess is more accurate. But I am kind of just a more let's make this work type of person. So I don't always do that. But if you are newer to sewing, it is definitely helpful to do that, because having really perfect even pieces makes things go smoother. And when you're newer to quilting, things going smoothly is really lovely. So see, this piece ends up a little bit tall too. Like I said, I will make sure all the dimensions are 100% perfect in the pattern, but today we are just kind of going with the flow. There we go. We have our 20-inch camp mushroom with our found treasure textile, and our 15-inch camp mushroom with our found treasure quilt block. So what fun. Our next step is going to be quilting them. The mushroom is just a fun foresty type block, and you can get this pattern if you join Grace's summer camp. So I'm going to be taking some pictures of these and then quilting these up, and I will show some little behind the scene clips of quilting it up on the Mini Quilter because I want you to be able to see that and see the process. So we have the camp mushroom blocks, and we're going to go into my forest and take a couple pictures of them. So come with me. Let's maybe take a picture here, and then we'll find another spot for the other one. Oh, what's this? Wow, a Grace mini quilter in the middle of the forest? Who would have guessed? Should we maybe quilt our camp mushroom block since it's right here and it looks like we have backing with our little helper? Wow, this is going to be amazing. Let's get all set up and then we'll do some quilting. What fun!
Let's take a second to dive a little deeper into the Mini Quilter. The Mini Quilter is a compact quilting frame designed to work with your home sewing machine, making it easy to finish quilts of any size. By zone quilting, you break your quilt into manageable sections, quilting one area at a time before moving to the next. This method allows you to handle large quilts without wrestling the entire bulk under your machine. It's an accessible, affordable way to experience frame quilting right at home, even in small spaces. Visit graceframe.com to learn more about the Mini Quilter. Now, let's get back to Kristin's fun little mushrooms.
Okay, so we have our Mini Quilter set up, and I actually have a backing and batting prepped. And I'm gonna actually clamp these on first and then put my block over top of it. So I'm gonna take off our clamps and we're gonna clamp our fabric on the back first. And then let's kind of swing that over. We wanna take off all the clamps. And we want to bring this forward, and we have our block that we want to go on top, and we have this handy little guide that gives us an idea of how far to put it from the railings so that we can quilt it easily. So we want this to be roughly right about there for the start of our quilting, and then we are going to clamp kind of the bottom of that in. And then you kind of twist these to tighten it. It's okay if it's a little bit off, like not perfectly straight, because our backing is so much larger than the front. And then we're going to clamp these sides just to kind of give us a little bit more taut, and we can start quilting. We can also kind of roll this up because we can only quilt out as deep as our throat space is. So we're going to have to move our block a couple times. So I can roll that up and I can get moving. And what I found is I like to kind of sew down the edge first. To tell me how far I can quilt. So, and then I'm going to go kind of back up. Remember, I'm moving it and I'm determining how big my stitches are by how fast I move it. So we might avoid loops because I can't go all the way to the edge. We're so close to be able to go all the way to the edge with a 15-inch block, but not quite. So I'm going to kind of go back to the beginning. And then I'm just going to kind of speed up and do a little bit of a meandering, loopy type of quilting over my quilt block. So it's good to practice on this because it does take some getting used to for the like speed and how big your stitches are. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so we're basically to the edge. I'm gonna shift it a little bit and then we'll do another go at it. So we just have to take all of our clamps off. Because I want to like move it down, I'm gonna do a little, just move it down a little bit. I should have done that before I unclamped it. Sometimes I forget things. And we've got this guide again to tell us how close to the edge we need to be so we can quilt. Right about there, I feel like. I can pull it up a little bit and clamp it down on the top. When we clamp at the bottom here, we're clamping in from the front, and because our block isn't very big, we're losing a little bit of that, so we're going to have to just make sure we're keeping it taut with our hands. And when we're clamping from the front and the sides, we kind of go in at the side, so then we can like twist it to pull it taut. Roll up the bottom, and we do have some clamps on the back that we can use to kind of hook that back up so we can make sure we have as much quilting space in the throat as we can. So you kind of have to plan out where you're going to go because you do have to move it a bit. And I'm just kind of holding the fabric at the bottom so it doesn't bow too much. I think we might have done it. Let's take a look. Let's make sure we've got, it's good on the bottom. All right, here we go. We can kind of see our little quilt block, our mushroom. So that's kind of fun. But the Mini Quilter did a good job of a smaller block. So that is the Grace Mini Quilter. How easily it glides from back to front and side to side gives you the ability to do really any free motion design that you can do. It has these awesome pressure clamps that hold the machine really tightly in place on the carriage, so you don't have to worry about your machine falling off. And it also has adjustability back to front, so if you have a machine with a deeper throat space in here, you can quilt more space than this machine does. So you have all the way up, really. I've got another 3 inches that it can come forward if I had throat space, but then you can also do more space on the bars. It also has these like elastic clamps that are really great to hold your quilt while you're quilting. And I think it's a unique product from Grace for smaller spaces and for smaller blocks. It was fun to quilt the camp mushroom blocks, this one and then that one, on this machine and frame. And I hope you enjoyed making a camp mushroom block. You can bind this, or you could sew a backing onto it, like right sides together with an envelope opening and make a pillow. Turn it into a tote bag. There's lots of fun things that you can do. Check out again my capped quilt if you're interested in a patchwork mushroom. I also have lots of fun patterns in my Etsy shop, including like my goose over here. So thanks so much for coming to quilt with me in the forest today. I hope you had fun. I did, and we'll see you around.